afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for our webinar on the rebirth of workflow using business processes to automate your team. So while everybody funnels in and we wait for those stragglers to get in, we'll just go over a couple of housekeeping items. So today, during the duration of the webinar, all participants will be muted. But if you have questions, definitely feel free to type them in the chat box. We will be monitoring that throughout the duration of the webinar, and we'll address questions at the end as well. Slides and screenshots are available upon request, so if that's something that you are interested, just reach out and let us know. You can send that in the chat, or you can send an email after the fact. And then the webinar will be recorded and it will be uploaded to our CDI YouTube page. So it's something you can share out with other users at the organization if you want. Additionally, in today's webinar, I included quite a few handouts. So if you're new to Laserfiche or you're new to process automation, definitely take some time, download those handouts. There's a ton of great information in there from Laserfiche on how to approach building your workflows and how to build them out. So definitely take some time to get those. So during today's webinar, our agenda is going to be going through, what considerations do you need to make while building automation in Laserfiche, how to approach it, things to consider. We'll also go through, how do people interact with Laserfiche workflows and how to start a process with a Laserfiche form. And so I'll be going through kind of the differences of each of those modules. And then we'll talk through some best practices in creating your digital automation in the system, as well as follow up with any questions. So let's dive right in. Today's webinar is really intended for anybody. So this could be new users to Laserfiche automation, it could be Laserfiche administrators or power users, really anybody who is interested in learning more about process automation within Laserfiche. And then throughout the duration of the presentation, I do have kind of a mix of screenshots from both Laserfiche Cloud and Laserfiche self-hosted environments. And a lot of these best practices and, approaching workflow automation are applicable to both a self-hosted and or a Laserfiche Cloud system. So you don't have to have one or the other today to participate. So I want to start off with a quick poll. I like to kind of engage and see where everybody's at as far as your knowledge of Laserfiche automation. Would you say you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced? Today's presentation is maybe just geared a little bit more towards beginner and intermediate. I'm not going to be doing actual configuration during today's session. More so just kind of describing and outlining some of the differences and pros and cons again. All right. So let's see here. Let me share it quick. Looks like we've got 38% beginner, 45% intermediate, and just a few advanced users. And thank you all for joining. Let me go ahead and find that. We'll jump back in. So what is business process? What are business processes, I guess? So business processes are defined as just a collection of business tasks and activities that, when performed by people or systems in a structured course, they produce an outcome that contributes to the overall business goals. What we're looking at here is a forms process that was configured for expense reporting, and we'll talk about this one a little bit more as we go. But Laserfiche has multiple process automation tools that you can use within the software, assuming they're a part of your existing configuration. So let's kind of talk through them. So there's the obvious one, workflow automation, which allows you to route things within your repository, rename documents, push to external databases, do all of that stuff. So there's workflow automation. In conjunction with that, we see forms automation used as well. And forms is used for more collecting information from external parties or for task automation and routing from there. So workflows in Laserfiche provide no-code automation of complex business tasks. We typically use workflow for heavy lifting and really, again, anything that happens within the repository. So if the document exists in the Laserfiche repository, we're going to use workflow. If we want to collect information from an external party, or we're doing task management internally for assigning, a public records request to a department to review and apply documentation, we would typically use forms automation for that. It makes it a lot easier. And when Laserfiche Forms was created, Laserfiche didn't rebuild all of the activities that workflow already had. So, the tools are not exactly created equally, but they are used in conjunction with one another. Quick Fields is on here because back in the day, some organizations didn't have Laserfiche workflow as part of their system. And so you could leverage Quick Fields to extract the data from your documents and then auto-file it and rename it from there. So again, a little bit of overlap in some scenarios with Quick Fields to workflow if you didn't have workflow on your system. Then we have Connector. Laserfiche Connector is an add-on to most self-hosted systems, but bundled into cloud environments. And it's a tool that I would say is like an extension of workflow. Connector allows you to do one-to-one integration connections with your other applications. So if you are in your CRM, your client relationship management tool, and you want to view information on your vendors, if you have a specific vendor selected, you could engage the connector, which you could then use to kick off a workflow that will start, whatever business task you might have. Finally, there's also the API and SDK, which we won't be focusing on today, but these are available as advanced options for accomplishing the automation or connectivity to other applications should you need it. So you might be asking, where do I start? With any process automation in Laserfiche, it's very important that you start with a diagram. You need to understand what you're building. So it's by far the most important step to approaching automation. When you diagram the process, you're able to see the bigger picture and follow the process from start to finish. Mapping also helps you identify users who should be involved, documents that are needed, notifications, and timelines. On the screen here, I have a couple of tools that we typically see used for mapping out processes. Microsoft Visio is, by far one of the most advanced, but it requires a license and it comes at an added cost, and not everybody has that within their organization. Something that we use internally and that we recommend a lot to clients who don't have Visio is Draw.io. It works a lot like Microsoft Visio, but it's free and it's just on the internet for you to use. It allows you to drag and drop the shapes and create your process flow. And, for those of you who are just really comfortable in Excel, the Microsoft products, you can certainly diagram things out within those as well. But definitely take a look at the Draw.io as it's a really great alternative. This is what the Draw.io interface looks like. And again, this is, somewhat similar to Visio, where you can drag and drop your shapes, and then, our process starts here, and then we have our decision diagram and, all of that. And it allows you to add the text and contents and color code it, and all of that great stuff. So just an example. So a couple of considerations when you're planning out your automation and you're drafting your diagram. You want to think about what problem you're trying to solve for. For example, what's the purpose of an invoice review process? It's to make sure that invoices are generated for the correct amount and paid on time so that there's no late fees. Or the purpose of an HR document is to make sure that an employee is onboarded properly so they can begin work as soon as possible. So you want to think about what you're trying to do with this process to help get you started. You also want to get feedback and buy-in. Don't dive headfirst into automation without vetting out the process and talking to the end users. Getting input from those end users oftentimes really helps with the buy-in and the overall adoption of the process. Think about it. Do you really want to use a process that makes your life harder? I sure don't. Laserfiche suggests, in their documentation, one of the Laserfiche ebooks that I would recommend you download is that you split your process into stages. And by splitting your process into stages, you are not only helping with the design aspect of your flow, but it's also helping you determine and really easily be able to see what you want to report on. So if we look at the travel requests, you've got these stages, submit the request, review the request, book the travel, and notify the requester. Each stage breaks down into reportable items as part of your process automation within Laserfiche. And that directly ties into the next consideration, reporting. Are you interested in tracking how many people are requesting travel? Are you curious about what type of travel it is? How long it's taking to book the travel? Each of these items can be found in those stages that we outlined, and that can in turn provide you submission or metadata on the items that you're interested in learning more about and tracking. And then as part of your flow, if you're familiar with Laserfiche workflow, then part of the process is determining how you kick off your workflow. So when you're configuring your workflows, typically Laserfiche typically sets the starting rules for your process as the last thing you do. So you build your diagram process flow, and then you're like, how does this kick off? And you build out your starting rules from there. So that's something you'll need to consider as part of your flow. Is this going to start off as a form submission where we're collecting information? Is it going to start off with somebody adding a new document into the repository? Is it going to start off with a metadata change? All of those things are items you need to consider when building out your automation. And then again, I would recommend checking out this building a business process you can report on. It talks about building out those stages and additional considerations for building out your process. So you've built out your process diagram. Now you can configure your Laserfiche automation. So whether you're using Laserfiche workflow, once you've had some training on the configuration interface, this is really something that most users can do on their own. CDI does have consulting resources on standby to help you get through, whatever configuration needs you might have. But again, once you've had some training, maybe go through some of these ebooks, click on the links that are available through those ebooks, watch those videos, the Aspire trainings. Building out this automation is approachable, really, for anybody. You just gotta drill down into it. So what we're looking at here is actually the cloud-based workflow designer. So I just wanted to kind of point out that the interface is very user-friendly. It gives you all of your activities over here on the left-hand side, and then you've got your designer pane where you just click and drag and drop them. And then on the right-hand side, it walks you through what you need to configure. Of course, some activities and actions are different between self-hosted and cloud, but the general drag and drop design is the same from one to the other. So again, a lot of this stuff is relevant to both. So once you have your process design all set up within your Laserfiche, then your next step is to test. Test some more. We recommend getting users involved in this process as well. It helps them understand how the process flow is going to work, what notifications they're going to receive, what happens next. And then once testing is complete, you can go ahead and move it into production. If your team doesn't have a separate test environment from your production account, we do recommend deleting the test instances that were processed through your process, so that once you go live, you're building reports off of accurate information and not test instances. So that's just something to be mindful of. If you don't have a separate test environment, make sure you clean up those test scenarios so that that's not in your reporting. That makes things a lot harder to read and understand. Additionally, if any of you were at Empower last week, you may have heard about some of the upcoming exciting features that are coming with version 12, which allows you to identify your automation submissions as test processes. And so that way you don't have to worry about deleting things down the road. You can simply just say, run me a report with my test instances, or run me a report, with all of my production instances, and you don't have to spend time deleting things like that. So that's a pretty exciting feature. If you're not, not new to Laserfiche, I think that is probably one of the most exciting features that we're hearing about. So one of our agenda items is, how do people interact with workflow? So I want to explain a little bit of history here first. Laserfiche workflow and forms do have some overlap, but there's also some differences. So again, initially when Laserfiche rolled out workflow and then later they rolled out forms, they didn't recreate activities that workflow could already do. They just used forms to mainly, again, collect information that can then push it to workflow, and workflow can do the rest. So when building workflow or building automation, workflow, again, is more repository based. So let's take a quick example of, or I'm going to show you a quick example of what that looks like. So being repository based is your folder structure. The content exists in your folder structure, and you want to, oh, my screen. And you want to have a workflow kickoff. So you might come into, I'm going to go into my clerk's file, and I'm just going to go into incoming scans, and I'm going to right click to say, I want a new blank document. So you can build workflows, again, that kick off when a new document is added, or when metadata fields are updated, or at a specific time frame. There are so many different ways that you can start a workflow from within the repository. You can also build workflows that kick off on demand. And so if you have an employee acknowledgement workflow, and every once in a while you have a new policy or procedure that you need to push out, you can build a workflow that essentially is set up to blast all of your users, but it only does that once you add the document into the folder and say, okay, kick this off. And then it will deliver the messaging and let you know who's done what and when. So we're going to go ahead and just bring in this blank document. I'm going to apply agenda packet. We're just going to go with today's date. This is a tokened date, if you're not really familiar with that. Laserfiche allows you to use tokens of information to easily pull in data or calculate information for you. So this is the token for calculating today's date. Then we can add text for this description. And if we go back to our general tab, this is just going to be called new document. It's going to be dumped into incoming scans. I'm not doing anything else except for adding those couple metadata fields. And now if I come back up here and I click refresh, uh-oh, where'd my document go? Well, all the criteria was set to grab that document. So I just did a quick auto-filing document. So based on those couple metadata fields and that file getting dumped into incoming scans, workflow knows, okay, I need to parse out the metadata from that document. And I see based on the fields that were calculated that that document needed to get filed into our agendas folder for 2024 because it was that date. And we can see here that the system auto renamed our document based on our criteria. So that's just a simple example of leveraging workflow. It's repository automation, allowing you to route things in the repository or kick off any of those actions. Another example would be if you added a bunch of statements into Laserfiche. Maybe we're getting a pull down from some other application, or your bank sends you statements quarterly for all of your clients. You can have those dumped into Laserfiche, and based off of the name of that document, we can say, oh, hey, we've met this criteria of our workflow, and now we need to auto-file it, and it can go into the repository accordingly. And then again, forms is used more for collecting or displaying information for task management. Before forms, we did have users leverage workflow for task management, but they would do it by, manipulating the metadata on documents. So it would get dumped into a folder, then they would have to come in here and change the metadata, and it just was a little bit more cumbersome. Definitely left confusion for users who don't come into the system a lot, which is why we got set up with Laserfiche Forms, or why Laserfiche came out with Forms. All right. So another one of our agenda items to talk about here is how to start a workflow with a Laserfiche form. So I'm going to walk you through the process for a simple business licensing process within Laserfiche. And the way that we can build a forms process and call a workflow is through the workflow service task. So we'll take a look at that when we jump into forms, but essentially you can incorporate as many workflow service tasks you need into your process. And so if we walk through it, I'm just going to kind of walk you through what this flow and why, again, we might want to call a workflow. So we're starting with an initial form submission. So somebody is filling out a form requesting a business license. And right away upon submission, that applicant or that submitter is getting an email saying, hey, we've received your request, we're taking action, here's our contact information if you have questions. And then simultaneously, it's getting routed to the initial approver. So, your clerk or somebody who needs to take action on that business license. And then they have the ability to go into this routing decision, so they can approve it, they can reject it. Again, you can set your flow up however you want. This is just, one very simple example. If they reject it, the process just dies. They get an email saying, hey, this was rejected. They can certainly try again. If it's approved, it will take the metadata information and it will save the metadata information and the document to Laserfiche. And it's pushing that and then it's going to kick off a workflow. And what this workflow is going to do is create a fillable Word document. So something that forms can't do directly is create fillable documents. And a lot of organizations that we work with require this feature. You have fillable PDFs now for, whatever request your resident might need to make of the city. And so you want them to maybe be able to fill it out online, but you still want the form to look like your form. And in order to make that process happen and allow your residents or external parties to submit information to you, but push it into your existing forms, is through a workflow. So that workflow, this first one is calling a workflow, which is generating a fillable document, which again, we'll look at. And then it's adding information into a table so that we know that this information or that this business license needs to have a payment collected. And then it's calling a separate workflow, which is going to generate an actual invoice for our submitter. And the workflow is going to go ahead and email the submitter. And then our process is going to end. So let's take a look at how that works. So again, I am in my cloud environment today just because that's what I have access to. And so I'm going to jump into our process automation. Something else really new and exciting that they unveiled with version 12 is that navigating to your other applications is going to be easier. So right now, if you're self-hosted, when you want to navigate to workflow or you want to navigate to forms, you have to go somewhere else. You're not just in your repository and clicking a button saying, go to my process automation. You have to maybe log into a separate server or something like that. And so Laserfiche 12 is going to have something similar to this navigation bar, or I like to call it the waffle, to help you get to the other areas of your repository, making that process a lot more seamless for users. So we'll jump into our process automation. and we're going to go into our business processes, which is the cloud version of Laserfiche Forms. And we'll take a look at that business license application again. And I just want to call out a couple of things. We already walked through it, but something great about the way that this works is it's really easy for you to, see what's related. So instead of clicking this and being like, okay, I have to try and figure out what workflow it is, if we expand the details in cloud, we have the ability to see, okay, this is what the workflow is called, and maybe I want to see it, and I'm like, I'm getting some error, what is it? And so we can go ahead and easily navigate to the workflow that's associated with our forms process. And so this will bring me and spit me out right onto the workflow process, where again, this initial workflow in our process is getting the date, creating an entry, a new document in Laserfiche. It's updating the Word template, and then it's attaching the document and assigning the field values and storing it in Laserfiche. So that's what this workflow is doing. And then again, if we jump back to our business process diagram, we can do the same thing with the create invoice, view our details, and then we can view the selected workflow if we want. So let's just take a look at this process quick so you can kind of see the whole thing in action and how the flow works. So again, this is just one scenario. This is just a demo. Your business licensing process can be a lot different from this, but just to give you an idea. So we'll do Jenny Penny. I'll use my own email. I'm just going to type in the minimal amount of information that we need here. Had some yogurt today, so we'll do some yogurt. And, again, if you're not familiar with forms, you can make certain fields required, as indicated by this star, so that you're always getting the minimal amount of information you need for these automation processes to actually run within your system. And we can have information in drop-down lists. It can be dynamic. So as you're making changes, maybe the form changes with you and gives you more information to fill out. Super great. Collecting information on the type of business. You can have disclaimers as well as like links that they click. These forms are highly customizable to really whatever your needs are. So we're going to just collect a signature here. And this is not a verifiable signature, it won't hold up in the court of law unless this person were to be like a licensed user where you could then leverage the audit trail to track, who's doing what. But if it's public facing, it's not a verifiable signature that can be upheld in the court of law. So we're submitting our form. That's step one. It's going to kick off a task for me. It's going to kick off that email to the submitter, letting them know, hey, you got something going on here. So if I jump back into our repository, something else kind of neat about cloud that self-hosted doesn't do yet is you get these notifications. So if you're working throughout the repository and maybe you don't have email set up, maybe you get this little icon up here saying, hey, you've got one new message, and you can click on it and says, hey, a task was assigned to you. Otherwise, you can certainly have emails go out, as I mentioned. I just want to show that quick email that automatically goes to the submitter. So, hey, Jenny Penny, your business license is being reviewed. Please call us if you have questions. You can even include an attachment of her original form submission on this email if you want. Again, endless options. So this is just going for initial approval. I'm going to assign it to me because in this scenario, this forms process is actually assigned to a group. So if you're not really familiar with forms, let me actually jump back into our task box, which I do all the time in Cloud. I'm just going to navigate to the tasks. So here, these are all of the open tasks. If I click on team tasks, normally if this was assigned to a team, you would be able to have a listing of tasks here, and then you could go ahead and assign them to yourself. Or tasks that are unassigned for whatever reason. Maybe the user isn't a part of the team anymore, then they would go into assigned. But if I go back into my task, I'm going to go ahead and assign this to myself. Then from there, I can apply a business license number. This is something you can do manually, or you could even have a workflow calculate it for you. So based on what type of business license they have, you know, it populates that and maybe a date for 30/24. And then you can type in your code. I don't know any actual codes, but we'll pretend. And then go ahead and approve the submission. And so I want to jump back to the PowerPoint really quick. So it was approved. Now it's saving it to Laserfiche. It's kicking off these workflows. It's going to generate that business license, and it's going to generate and email out an invoice. So just an example of using a Laserfiche Forms process to call a workflow to complete the actions that you need in your system. And I'm just going to go ahead and show you the email with the business license invoice that was generated. The business license itself is very similar. It's just, you know, a business license. But here we've got this Word document, and based on the information filled out, the Laserfiche workflow engine grabbed those metadata fields that were pushed in and generated this Word document for me. My Word takes an infinity amount of time to load, so bear with me. And then again, here's just one example of, you know, maybe one of our standardized invoices, and that information with Jenny Penny was all pushed in here according to the submission. So easy peasy. I want to point out a few other automation examples and templates that are available for you to download into the system. So Laserfiche has a solutions template library. There's over 150 solution templates now available for you to just import into your system and take advantage of. And these solution templates a lot of times do include a combination of Laserfiche Forms automation as well as Laserfiche workflows. So they're using the forms process to collect the information. They're using the workflow to carry out the repository type tasks. So a couple of them, I just like to call out, these are some of the more popular. So new vendor requests or onboarding. You can send out emails to those new vendors saying, hey, fill out this form, submit all of this information to me. You know, contract routing and approval, very similar. Expense reporting. You can make any of these processes as detailed or complex as your organization needs. And so the ones that are available for you to download in the solution templates business process library, you can download and then customize to your own. So actually, before I move on, I just want to show you where you can find that. So if you go into if you're self-hosted, if you just log into Laserfiche Forms, or if you're in cloud, you go into your business processes and you want to create a new business process, you can go ahead and just select on the solution templates. And then it will load the list for you, and you can narrow it down by your industry or, you know, your department to help you find processes that, you know, are available. And so if you're new to automation in Laserfiche, this is a super amazing tool to get familiar. You know, it puts it in there. It's a working solution, and you can play around with it and, you know, see what's possible. without, wreaking havoc on your system. So definitely take advantage of that. So again, I want to call out the expense reimbursement process. As it's designed right now, the whole process is just, and what we're showing on the screen now, this whole process is just handled by Laserfiche Forms. There's the submission, the approval, the routing task, and then the archiving to Laserfiche. Something that our team has done was to kind of keep the general flow where, you're filling out a form and it's going through approval, but we incorporated calling workflows. So when staff submits expense reports, a lot of times you get them as different types of attachments, like maybe it's a PDF or maybe it's a JPEG. They're all over the place. It just depends on how they're feeling that day. And so when receipts are getting routed, sometimes if they're different document types, it can be really cumbersome for the rest of the approvers to actually click on those things and look through them. And so you could build a workflow that pushes the attached documents to Laserfiche, converts them to a TIFF file type, and then combines them as one single attachment, and then carries out the rest of the routing process. And then that way, anybody else who gets or has to look at that expense report is viewing one documentation and scrolling through the pages versus having to click through a number of different documents to, try and find it. And, best of luck to you if they put the receipts in order, with how they entered them into the expense report. I don't know. If you've ever had to deal with expense reports, sometimes it's annoying, but we've got a really great solution here for you that you could definitely take advantage of. Just let us know. All right, so now that you've kind of learned a little bit more about Laserfiche automation, let's talk about some best practices. So you're probably really anxious to get going. So I connected with some of our consulting team members and I wanted to call out, some best practices that they go by, in their day-to-day life when we're working with you, our clients, our prospects. These are things that our team is always watching for and, training on. And all of these too, for the most part, if something isn't available in both self-hosted and cloud, I'll let you know. But creating a standardized naming practice. I mean, this sounds so simple, but I cannot stress this enough, especially if you're in an organization that has multiple departments leveraging Laserfiche and automation. We recommend a standardized naming practice. So in our folder structure here, this is actually a snippet of CDI. So we have CDHR. I don't know what CDI necessarily is. Other than City Store Digital Incorporated, but then we have CD operations. And so just using quick acronyms so that when you're perusing through your workflows or your forms processes, it's really easy for you to identify oh, this belongs to that department or this belongs to that department, a quick indicator. And then consolidating your business processes to kick off in a certain area of the repository. So if you're building a forms process that calls a workflow or you're using the API and it's pushing information into the repository and then workflows handling it from there, we recommend setting out a separate area in the repository for workflow to generate from. And so again, we've got our incoming scans folder internally, and then we have this business processes folder. And so some of the automation that we have, instead of going into the HR folder structure and directly into an employee's record, it's going to compile the information that workflow is going to grab in this folder. This makes troubleshooting a lot easier, and then you can maintain separate folders for each of those processes potentially, so that again, just troubleshooting and finding where you're getting errors down the road is a lot faster and easier. And then consolidating data sources. So as you grow your Laserfiche automation, you might start building processes that are leveraging data sources like a CRM lookup or like an ERP, vendor lookup, or, your permitting address lookup. you can have data sources of all types to help you populate information and metadata really easily. And so when you're building workflows, you do that typically in the designer, but the team recommended that you not only get familiar with the designer, but also the workflow admin console. Because when you log into the admin console, it lists out, it has a section listed specifically for data sources. And so you could start there saying, hey, I need to do a new permitting process and I want my address list. And so if you pop into the admin console, you could really easily see, hey, I have a data source for address lists, so I don't need to recreate it and have a completely separate one. You know, we can compile the same one or add a little bit of additional information to the same database or the data source that you have. So it just keeps your whole system a little bit cleaner, and it keeps you from having to update multiple data sources that contain the same amount of information. So definitely get workflow situated with the workflow designer and the admin console, and this one is specific to self-hosted systems. Include descriptions wherever possible. I know, firsthand here at CDI, but also with a lot of organizations, this seems irrelevant. You're a 5-person office, like everybody's going to know what the HR workflow does. Until they don't. So we definitely recommend including descriptions in with your workflow naming, as well as sometimes your activities. You have the ability to include descriptions with your activities. So if you do a routing field, you can say, hey, this action is actually routing to HR and management, whereas the next activity is routing directly to staff. And so it's really clear to you, again, what's happening in each spot. And you can do that in both cloud and self-hosted. Another one, which I had no idea on, this is one from Jason, who is on the line. He's here to help with any technical questions if you have any. But trying to avoid using the bundled activities and opt for a specific action in meeting. If each specific action as needed. Because this makes troubleshooting so much easier. So if I flip to the next slide here, here's an example. In self-hosted systems, there is this route entry to folder. And within this route entry to folder, there's the ability to move it, to assign fields, to assign tags. And if you have that all bundled into one activity and you're getting some error, you're going to have to go in and out of that activity to try and figure out what went wrong. Whereas if you build out each item individually, it's going to give you that error, circle around what's wrong so that you don't have to go back and forth like trying to figure out, was it the assigning the field values? Was it where I told it to move it? It's going to give you a more definitive answer. And I'm not saying you can't use the bundled activities, but in some scenarios, and especially as you're learning the system, definitely consider breaking it out as you go along. Another best practice that I was like, yeah, everybody should be doing this. I want to make sure everybody knows. But you can implement processes to provide you daily status reports on your workflows and your forms for things that aren't working. How often do you find that you're getting a notification from your, XYZ department and they're like, this stuff hasn't run and I haven't been receiving anything for like a month, wouldn't it have been nice to know that right away? So you can build processes to help track, workflows that have terminated, based on a specific date. And then you can build processes that automatically email that to you regularly so that you don't even have to go out and find it. It's just coming straight to your box, letting you know, hey, take action on this. Something's not right. And then again, this is just what that looks like in forms. So you can schedule a report to provide you the suspended instances for whatever processes you have. And then, it just emails you at the end, letting you know, hey, something's not working. You might want to look at it. And then the last couple best practices I have for you today is to set a schedule for reviewing the automation that's been configured within your system and identify whether it's in use or not, and then remove the unused items. This is really great for, managing change in your organization. Like if HR says, hey, I want this process, but they never use it, you can reevaluate with them and say, hey, we built this process a year ago, you used it twice. What do we need to change to make this a lot easier for you so that everybody's really getting the maximum out of your Laserfiche system? And then consider implementing a process for tracking those changes. And so here again at CDI, we have a changelog submission. So, we select the change that we're making, whether we're adding it, we're moving it, and then we track all of that. So again, we've got transparency all across the board as to why this is there versus not. And, I thought we had this at some point, but now we don't. So just some kind of basic infrastructure best practices that we'd recommend. So now I'm gonna open it up to some questions. So definitely, if you've got anything, feel free to type it in and we'll take a look here. I love this question, which is hi, Laura, and hi back. Definitely welcome and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. All right, well, we'll watch for questions if anybody has any, but I'll kind of continue on since we're not getting any. And I just want to call out some of our helpful resources again. Definitely check out our webpage. There's lots of great information, and then access to our YouTube channel where all of these webinars are available to you. All right, we've got a couple of questions funneling in. This is awesome. So one of the questions is, how do you have a process that a user can start and a workflow can start? I can't seem to get to start events on a single process. And I think I might kick that over to Jason again. Jason is from our pre-sales team, and he can kind of help us walk through these questions or decipher them maybe a little bit more clearly. Jason, do you have any thoughts on that first question?
Yeah, I actually have built one that does exactly that. It either starts from a forms process that starts from a workflow, and it can be started by someone filling out the starting form. The thing you have to look into is there's two different starting events. One's just called start event, and the other one's called message start event. And message start event is the one that you're going to have to use in that scenario for the person to fill out the form. The other thing you have to think about is the second step is the assign task. So when in our scenario, it was an employee review form, and what was happening was originally workflow would simply send out a notification for them to click on the link to the form, but that didn't give us any tracking, how long it had been waiting, things like that. So what we did was we created a change to that form, and that change to the form basically gives us the ability to have a second step two. So essentially you'll have two green buttons at the beginning of your form. One of them will go to an assigned step that will assign the task to what would generally be what you would call step two. The other one would assign it to the person, and it's essentially step one. Hopefully that makes sense. So workflow essentially starts the process and assigns the form to the person who needs to fill out their own employee review form. So rather than them filling it out and clicking start and assigning it to their manager, it was assigned to them first. They fill out the same form. So there's a couple of little tweaks you make to the process diagram, but it's totally possible.
Awesome. Jason, how about that next one? Can you give an example of how to find unused workflows and automation? And I don't know if you maybe want me to share my screen and you can walk me through it.
In terms of unused, it's basically looking for last use date. Like if you go to the workflow designer, for instance, There's really no way to see that in the on-prem solution. In the cloud solution, you've got things like last published date, published by Laura. Scroll to the right a little bit. Let's see, last modified by creation date. There's not a last used date anywhere. Although if you do run a report in like the Workflow Designer on-prem, that gives you the ability to basically run on each one and see when it was last started. Unfortunately, there's not an easy way to find, which would be awesome. Oh, hey, we haven't used this workflow in 6 months, or maybe we've updated it with a new version, and instead of being a version of the workflow, it's a completely new workflow. Those options can be there as well. In terms of forms, it's kind of the same thing. You kind of have to just look at the monitor and say, show me all the forms that are, or workflows that have been run in the last 60 days or something like that, and then compare that to your list of overall processes. That's a great suggestion, though. I would send that in as a suggestion to Laserfiche. They're actually taking suggestions for Laserfiche 12, so that would be a really good one, Keith.
Additionally, that kind of goes back to what I said as a best practice. Like as Jason alluded, there's no way to just generate a report for things that aren't on use. That's where you just kind of got to comb through, look at the reporting functionality and see, is this used or not, and then decipher it from there. So maybe setting that up as like a quarterly review or biannually, whatever makes sense for your team. All right, the auto creation of a Word document via workflow, is that available for self-hosted? And yes, it is. Jason, do you want to maybe talk about the couple of activities that are involved in it?
Sure. So it's very similar to the on-prem or to the cloud version. So what you do is you generally have a Word document that has tokens in it, much like you're creating a mail merge in Word. You're just not merging it against a data source. Then what you do is you upload that as a sample document, and in the step in workflow, and I think it's called update Word template or something like that. I can't remember what it's found. And so in that scenario, what you want to end up doing is you create an empty shell document in Laserfiche. You then fill out the Word document, and then from the second step, and then the third step is to, attach that filled out Word document to the entry that you created, because Laserfiche is going to keep, and the same for PDFs, Laserfiche is going to keep those fillable forms as a sample item in their repository so that it can be used over and over and over again. So basically, when you fill it out, you have to save a copy to the repository. Not difficult, just something that you have to step through just a little bit.
Additionally, from CDI, if you are a client of ours, we have implemented a new consulting hour that you can join. It's twice a month. It's available through our client portal. And you can sign up to that and get direct access to Jason to work through any of these more detailed questions on how to, what ifs types of things, and, get that quick help that you need. It doesn't cost anything. You just need to be a client of CDI's.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually weekly. So it's every other Tuesday and every other Thursday. So it was actually just before this call from 11 to 12 Mountain Time. Next week, it will be Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Mountain Time.
Awesome. More than I thought. I love that.
Every other Thursday, yeah, once a week.
Can you explain the difference of quick fields and workflows? I learned at Empower I can use quick fields to auto-rotate PDF files on import, and it saves the rotation. Can I do that in just workflow?
No. Short answer, the reason is quick fields is built to handle image documents, meaning it actually processes the image using generally different OCR methods. There is no OCR capability built into workflow, with the exception of passing a document off to the distributed computing cluster to run an OCR later. And that later may be a minute later, it may be an hour later. So it's not really great for having it directly in the in the line of the process, but it's good for doing it so that it's done when you need it later. QuickFields, on the other hand, is built to extract information off of images. And as part of that, when it does an OCR, if it notices that the document is rotated incorrectly, for instance, it got scanned upside down or sideways, and you want, everything was scanned portrait, but some of them are landscape spreadsheet images or whatever. It can auto-rotate those so everything is in the correct orientation when it gets to Laserfiche. It's actually the difference between the two items is that QuickFields really is good for handling and manipulating and extracting information directly off the image, auto-cropping, auto-sizing, auto-redacting, because it can read the text of the image. Workflow deals mainly with the document as a whole, especially triggering off of things like metadata and text that's already been extracted, things of that nature. So hopefully that answers that, Peggy.
All right, and then I think our final question for right now, and if we didn't address your question here on today's webinar, we'll reach out afterwards and talk through, whatever you might need. So last question we have here, is it possible in workflow to convert a Word or PDF document to a TIFF?
Short answer, yes. But it does not a native activity within workflow. It is a part of an extended activity that CDI has where we can convert PDFs to images. That's a great question, because in that workflow Laura showed where the items come in, the expense report, and there are JPEGs, there are PDFs, there are, basically any image file or PDF was what it was set for in that scenario. And what ends up happening is you want to merge all those items together. Well, workflow can merge images together, no problem. But as you know, Laserfiche treats Word documents and PDFs in the repository as read-only. So you have to convert those to TIFF images to do that first. So Emily, essentially what you'd end up doing, I think that was who asked this one. Oh no, Dana, sorry. So Dana, what you'd end up doing is the documents would come in, and then the next step would be for each of those documents that's a PDF or a Word document, you would want the system to convert them. Basically, it's using the SDK toolkit to run, for lack of a better explanation, to run a snapshot on them to convert them to images. It just does it programmatically. And it's really a nice way to handle things. It's not a native application. It's an application that CDI has written to extend what's available in workflow. So you do have the ability, if you have programmers on staff, to use the Laserfiche Software Developers Kit, assuming you have a license for it, to create your own custom workflow activities. And that's what CDI has done, is we have bundles of activities for extra things that are not standard out of the box steps that can happen in workflow. So that's how that one's done.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason, and thank you, everyone. Again, if we didn't get to your question, we will reach out after today's session and help work through whatever you've got and go from there. But I just want to finish up. Here are some additional CDI resources that are available to you. Definitely check out that client portal where you can go in and sign up for the Ask the Expert, or check out any of our other upcoming events. All of those things are available to you. And then lots of really great Laserfiche resources. So the Solution Exchange, where you can learn about what other organizations are doing. The Aspire or certification trainings from Laserfiche. Again, if you're a CDI client, you're interested in any of these or getting a certification, reach out to your account manager or your sales team member, and we'll help you get credits for those. So definitely take advantage. And then, of course, if anything else comes up after this call, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You know, if I can't answer your question, I definitely got great resources internally like Jason, who can help me address anything that's more technical. But I appreciate everybody joining us today, and please make sure that you fill out the survey at the end and let us know what you want to see in future webinar topics. And thank you so much.